Attention darts fans, after searching high and low, to and fro, from coast to coast on wine and toast, the award for best hashtag in the game goes to Dynamite Darts Content, and your winner is the weekly Dartscast, baby. 3 words, Dynamite Darts Content. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the weekly Dartscast in association with Darts Corner. I'm Alex Moss, and alongside me as always my co-host, the darts statistician, Mr. Hang Tight, Burton DeWitt. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. This upcoming weekend I might be playing in 2 darts tournaments in 2 different states on the same day. So I'm branching out and doing some traveling for the darts. But I'm doing well. How are you, Alex?
Very nice. Yeah, sounds like you'll be enjoying the darts in 2 different states as well. I'm doing well, thank you. The last week of the football season for my team, Colchester, playing tonight when we're recording. Not going very well, but hopefully they can survive in League 2 for another season. And speaking of Colchester, it was good to meet one of my fellow youth fans who's involved in the darts, Owen Binks, on Saturday at Notts County away. Sadly, we couldn't mark the occasion with a win, but let's get on to the darts. That's more important. Lots to discuss. Another busy weekend to look back on, and we'll start with the Euro Tour, where Gary Anderson ended a 10-year wait for his second Euro Tour title, beating Ross Smith 8-6 in Sunday night's final in Sindelfingen. Already in 2024, he's won a floor title. He's now got a Euro Tour title. But our question of the week, sponsored by Condor Darts, is how many more major titles will Gary Anderson win before the end of his career?
It's a tough question because it's been so long now since he's won a major title. It's been, excluding the World Cup, it's been close to 6 years. It'll be 6 years this summer, early autumn. It'll be 5 years since he's won the World Cup. But he's also not been as good as he's been over the last 12 months since then. And in many ways, he might now be better than he was in 2018 when he won the World Match Play, when he won the Champions League. He won the World Match Play in arguably the greatest final ever played on the Winter Garden stage, outlasting Mensur Suljovic in over 40 legs, where Mensur averaged 104. And when you think that that's how he used to be, how good he used to be, and he, a couple years earlier winning a pair of world titles, and to now be able to say he might be a better player than he was then is a tough thing to say. But there's a lot of evidence of it. He's far and away the best player in the Players' Championship event so far this year, and he was right up there last year as well. And there's signs that he's improving, and he was now able to win a Euro Tour where he was on his B and C game over most of the weekend. Okay, his first 2 matches he was absolutely brilliant, 104, 110, but the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the final over that last session, he was not at his best. He was not at his second best. That was his low B, high C game, and it was still good enough to win. He was still good enough to hit at the right times. And sure, he got lucky with Ross Smith missing all those darts to force a last leg decider in the final. And you've got to think, if Ross Smith got to a last leg decider with how he had snuck through all of his matches, he was going to find a way. But he missed those darts, and Gary Anderson hit, and Gary Anderson won. The thing is, though, he will need to improve his television game in order to get back in the winner's circle on television. He struggled against Brendan Dolan at the World Championships this year. He struggled in most of his matches in Minehead this year. He actually played well in the one he lost to Martin Lukeman, but he was in the low 90s in his other 2. In the end, he didn't need to be any better. He won both matches. But again, it was not the Gary Anderson we've seen on the floor. It's not the Gary Anderson we saw over the first couple rounds in Sindelfingen. And even the end of last year, he had a great run in the Grand Slam to the quarterfinal, where he pushed Luke Humphries in a bruising affair. But at Minehead, he wasn't that good. And he went out to Dimitri Vandenberg averaging in the 80s, in a match that Dimitri Vandenberg didn't do much better than Gary in. He's going to need to find his televised game, but he's not far off. Right now in the FDI rankings, he's 3rd in the world, and I don't think that is an exaggeration. He's playing some phenomenal darts, and he's going to be, if he keeps this up, one of the favorites in Blackpool this summer. He'll likely be one of the favorites in all the televised events at the back end of the year, but he needs to bring that floor game, and at least what we saw in the first 2 rounds of this Euro Tour event in Sindelfingen, to the televised stages if he's going to win a major title. So right now, I don't know, because we've seen 2 different Gary Andersons so far this year, and so far over the last 2 years, and the one we'll need to see for him to win a televised event he hasn't brought on television.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And it's a question that's split a lot of our listeners, it's got to be said, because the poll on Twitter at the moment is open all week. So do go and have your say. 23% going with 0 majors coming for Gary Anderson, 37% going with 1, 22% going with 2, and 18% going with 3+. So fairly mixed opinions from our listeners so far. But one thing that we can draw from that is that 77%, 3/4 of our listeners, think that Gary Anderson is going to win at least one more major title before the end of his career. And already we're going to talk about Gary Anderson later on in the show as well, but his CV stacks up as one of the best in the history of the PDC. 8 major titles, 2 world titles in 2015 and 2016, 2 Premier Leagues, match play, UK Open, so on. And he's made a lot of other major finals as well. Some people can forget sometimes. They talk about all the titles he's won, but 13 other major finals in the PDC as well. And more often than not, it was Phil Taylor or Michael van Gerwen stopping him from winning more titles. And I think many people would probably look back at some of those defeats and go, there's a few that got away there for Gary Anderson. He could well be on double figures by now, and even more than that as well. But like you mentioned, it's been a long time since the Flying Scotsman won a major title, a singles major if we're including the World Cup, which on this show we do for obvious reasons. But since the last one that he won, 3 final defeats. He had the infamous one at the Grand Slam with Gerwyn Price, then in more recent years the match play in 2020, and then the World Final with Gerwyn Price in 2021. But the last 3 years, if you look at darts players' pages on Wikipedia and you go to their major record, there's a lot of blue on there for Gary Anderson, and that means early exits in events before the latter stages, quarterfinals, semis, finals and titles. And we know Gary's not one for talking himself up after wins, and even after winning this Euro Tour at the weekend, he said he's never been so lucky to win some of those games, and surviving the match starts against Josh Rock in the quarterfinals, squeezing past Rob Cross in the semis, and then that final with Ross Smith as well. As you mentioned, he had those chances to take it to the decided leg, but the 3 averages in that Sunday night, 89, 93 and 90, very rarely these days do you see a player put together those numbers across 3 games and win a Euro Tour title. But that is what Gary Anderson did, and he deserves some credit for that. And at 53 years old, 54 by the time we get to the next World Championships, I can't say with any confidence how much longer we're going to see Gary Anderson on the tour. But I think an interesting line from his interview, although he said he was lucky, he did say the next time I might win it outright by playing properly. So he believes that this wasn't a last hurrah at the weekend. So as long as Gary Anderson believes, then I'm going to do the same as well. I think he's already written his legacy in the game, but I'm not ready to write him off writing possibly one more chapter where he becomes a 9-time major winner in the PDC. So yeah, I think there's a strong chance that we see him lift another major title before he's done.
But let's talk now about the beaten finalist, Ross Smith, 2 legs shy in his first Euro Tour. Of course, he's a European champion, even if he's not a European Tour champion. But how much of a boost could this be for the rest of his 2024 season?
Yeah, I think it could be. And as you say there, the first Euro Tour final for Ross Smith, and actually a first final on a stage in the PDC since he won that European Championship 18 months ago. So he's been trying to follow in the footsteps of Rob Cross, winning what we call the unofficial Euro Tour finals and then going on to win a Euro Tour title and come very close to that. In the last few years, he's been getting to quarterfinals, a semi-final in this event last year as well. So he's gone one better this year. Must be something about Sindelfingen that Ross Smith seems to like. But a bit like I mentioned with Gary a moment ago, he rode his luck at times at the weekend. He actually faced 12 match darts on that Sunday. It was the 12th one that went in, Gary Anderson winning the final. But before then, Richie Edhouse, 6 darts to beat him in the last 16. Damon Heta, he had a dart to win the quarterfinal, and then 3 for Michael van Gerwen in the semi-finals. So he's had a huge slice of luck there. But as we've said before in this game, and players say it as well, sometimes you just need that little bit of luck. And in the case of Ross Smith, when it comes to some of the biggest events, he's not had much luck on his side. I think back to that epic game that he had at Ali Pali with Dirk van Dijvenbode a couple of years ago at the Worlds, when he threw, 19 180s and lost in a sudden death leg, had match darts in that game as well. More recent times, the first round of his European Championship defence, loses with a 98 average in the first round. A 104 average in the Players' Championship finals isn't enough. And then the most recent World Championships to Chris Dobey, loses out with 103. And even this year as well, we had the Masters. He averaged 99 lost in the deciding leg to Stephen Bunty, who came back to win that game and goes on to win the title. So maybe Ross Smith, he was due a bit of luck at some point, and here it was with those match darts that he survived on the way to the final. And in the end, you could say maybe his luck did run out. He had, I think it was 7 darts at a double to take the final to that deciding leg. So it would have been maybe a bittersweet end to the weekend for him, not getting that chance to take it to a decider. But I think already straight after the final, you could see that Ross Smith, he'd already processed his weekend's work in the right way. He wasn't getting too high from it, and he wasn't getting too low from it either. He was saying, it's back to the practice board and I'm going to try and go one better next time. And I don't think we saw the best of Ross Smith at the weekend. We know there's plenty more in the tank. There's more levels that he can reach. We've seen it before. But to get to a final, I'm sure he's going to be thinking, if I can just find those extra gears, then next time maybe I won't have to survive those match starts. Maybe I'm going to win these games more comfortably, and I'm going to go that one step further, and he's going to get his name on some silverwares again. So I think this weekend, it's got to be seen as a boost for Ross Smith going into the rest of the season.
I think you're absolutely right, because, so far this season, he's been playing some pretty good stuff and he's been getting better over the last month or so, but he hasn't been getting the rewards for it. And they talked about it on the commentary over the weekend. Like, he's had so many hard luck losses when he's playing brilliantly this year and even last year. But this past weekend seemed to be the reverse of that, where he wasn't playing poorly, but he was definitely not playing his brilliant best. And yet he was getting lucky and finding a way through. The luck suddenly smiled on him when he wasn't at his best. And I don't know if I agree that he ran out of luck in the final. As you mentioned, he missed 7 darts to force a decider, and most of those really weren't all that close. That was, you could say he bottled that chance to force a last leg decider in a leg that Gary Anderson wasn't just not at the races. He wasn't yet even in his car to get to the races for much of that leg. Ross Smith has no one to blame but himself for not forcing the last leg decider. But in the end, it was a great weekend where he rode his luck most of the weekend, and he rode it to perfection, or near perfection. So far this year, though, he's already made 3 other semis in the Players' Championship events, and he's 14th in averages. And as I mentioned, over the last month or so, he's been getting better. In his last 24 matches in Players' Championship events, in 21 of them, he was no worse than 1.5 points below his seasonal average. And if you look over generally, a player will probably be about 3 or 4 points below their average, maybe once every 5 or 6 matches. And he's not just that. He's not even half that bad in 1 out of every 8 matches. 21 of those 24 basically at his season average or better. That means that over those matches, he's improved where he was from the first part of the season. Additionally, he's now up to 13th in the FDI rankings, and he's just a fraction of a point from number 9. That means he's, again, among the elite in the game right now. I'm really impressed with the improvements that Ross Smith has made, and he seems to be finding some gears that even in those heights that he's hit over the last couple of years, we didn't really see him hit before. I think there's still more to come from him, and I think there's still more progression to be made. And obviously getting through when you're not on your best, when you're so used to playing your best and somehow losing out, can only be a good thing for Ross Smith. I think a title is right around the corner, whether it's on the Euro Tour or in a Players' Championship event. Okay, it matters because there's a lot of money difference between the two, and one of them is more likely to get you into the Grand Slam than the other. But right now, with how close he's been so often, any title will do, and this will push him in the right direction.
We'll be back in a moment to talk about the Women's Series at the weekend, but before we do, let's hear from one of the surprise packages so far on the Women's Series in 2024. 2 semi-finals and a quarter-final already this year. Here's our chat with Gemma Hayter. I'm pleased to say we're joined by a 2-time semi-finalist on the Women's Series this year, Gemma Hayter. Thanks for the time, Gemma. How are you doing?
No problem. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Doing well, and it's great to chat again. I remember chatting with you a long time, even before this podcast started, 2016. You just made your England debut in the British Internationals. 8 years on, what are your memories from that weekend?
That was a great weekend. I had all my family come with me, so it was... it was really enjoyable. It was nice. They were obviously really proud and excited for me. I remember a very good karaoke session on the Friday night.
Well, I've got to ask you now, what was your choice of song for the karaoke?
I think I sang Penny Arcade, but I'm not 100% sure.
Good shout. Well, that weekend you did the karaoke. You also played Wales and Scotland at the darts as well. You picked up a win in that Scotland game to help England win the title. And just looking at the team that you were with that weekend as well, Lisa Ashton, Fallon Sherrick, Trina Gulliver, Dita Hedman, Lorraine Winstanley, and you're only, I think, 22 years old at the time. How special was it to just be a part of that setup at such a young age?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was one of my dreams to do that, to play for England and represent my country. I didn't quite realise that I was on the cusp of that at that time, I think. So it was all obviously a big surprise and a great achievement for me then.
Yeah, I remember you saying it was a bit of a surprise getting that call up for England, but halfway through the season, the qualification period, I guess, you realised you were playing in the form of your life. So how did you find out that you were in the team?
So I got a phone call when I was at home. I think just like a typical young 20-year-old. I think I was actually playing the PlayStation and had to pause my game to answer the phone call.
And at that time as well, you were a regular for Hampshire. You'd been playing for the ladies team since the age of 15. But going back to the beginning for you in darts, where did it all start? How did you first get introduced to the game?
So my mum and dad and my auntie, my nan and granddad always had pubs. So I'd always been growing up in pubs, etc. And obviously we all know that darts is a pubs game. So I was just introduced to it that way.
And I was doing a bit of research earlier as well. Your partner, Stephanie Smee, quite the player herself as well, a semi-finalist at Lakeside in 2008. Does she still play as well?
She doesn't, unfortunately. She only plays when I drag her on the practice board with me.
Fair enough. And for you, after that England debut, you said the aim was to get in the team again, but it would be hard because of your work commitments. You didn't play on the tour. So where did your darts go after that? Did you just continue playing at a local level?
Yeah, it was just a local level. I gave up county not long after that, actually. Obviously, me and Steph got more serious, and we wanted to get on the property ladder. So now we've been together 9 years and we've had a house for nearly 5. So
excellent. And the women's game, we've seen it make some strides in the last few years as well. The achievements of Fallon, Lisa, Bo Greaves, and so on. We saw you come back onto the scene this year on the women's series. You'd not previously played on the BDO tour, so what was it that persuaded you at this time to take that plunge? Was it just being settled in your life and you wanted to give darts another go?
Yeah, definitely. I think having a settled home life obviously encouraged me a lot more. We've always had a dartboard in the house, but it probably wasn't as used as it is now. But at the end of January, I just picked my darts up and was having a chuck, a bit of Luke Littler fever that's been going around. And then just realised that I was playing really well and just thought I'd give it a bash.
And so before that first Women's Series weekend, was it just playing at home or had you started playing at local level again?
So I'd gone back to Super League, obviously in Hampshire, for Hampshire. And then I joined a men's series every Wednesday night. And I was just playing better and better every week, beating the men, winning the finals against the men.
Were you a little bit surprised at how quickly you found that form again? Were you expecting it to take a while, or did you manage to get back up and running pretty quickly?
I think my scoring's always been there. My doubles are just iffy sometimes. Either it's first dart or 31st dart. There's no in between. So I was a bit cautious of my doubles, but I've always been confident that I can score.
So going into that first Women's Series weekend, what were the expectations you'd set for yourself, being, I guess, back in the limelight? Were you confident that you could find some results, or were you content to just see how that first weekend went and not put too much pressure on yourself?
So the aim, I said to Steph before that weekend that I just wanted to win at least £400. And then, the first event, I'd already done that and made a semi-final. So that was it's crazy.
And so after you had a little bit of time away, what was it like walking into that venue in Wigan on that Saturday morning for the first event? I guess seeing some familiar faces, being back in that
competitive darts environment? Was it excitement, nerves, a mixture of both?
I think it was a mixture of both. I was definitely nervous, and I also didn't know, but obviously because it was 8 years, if anybody would recognise me. So it was. Dita's always friendly. Dita always says hello, even when I was young, going to events like Selzy. She would always, Hailing Island. She would always say hello. So I knew Dita would know who I was, but I didn't really know the rest of them would pay any attention.
Well, they certainly paid attention after that first event, didn't they? Because what a return it was. A semi-final, as you mentioned, a 91 average to beat Lorraine Winstanley in the last 16, and in the end, within one leg of the final, just losing out to Bo Greaves in a decider in that semi-final. Was there a point, maybe when you were 4-2 up against Bo, that you thought, hang on, I could go all the way on debut and win the title?
I didn't actually. I was quite focused. So normally when I get into the zone, I don't really think about it too much. But I think after I was 4-2, I don't think I had another double until the last leg, and I hit 25 instead of the bullseye. So when Bo steps up, there's not much you can do to stop her. Yeah,
that's very true. Well, across these first 2 weekends, 2 semi-finals, a quarter-final, some big name scalps, big averages. You've definitely caught the eye. A 96 average to beat Anastasia Dobromoslova, then a 97 to beat Fallon Sherrock. I know you said back in 2016 when you were getting that England call up, you're in the form of your life. Surely this run's topped that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd never. I mean, it's one thing believing that you can do it, but another thing to see it happen is, it's quite amazing.
And the win against Fallon, the way you played as well with that 97 average, I'm guessing that's the one that stands out the most for you, and you almost beat her again at the weekend. So how pleased have you been with these 2 weekends so far, and mixing it with the very best already?
Oh yeah, I've been thrilled really. I never expected to come back and make such an impact. I just hopefully I can keep it going.
Definitely. Well, now you've got a taste of the Women's Series. What is the plan for the rest of 2024? Are you going to be playing in all the other weekends on the Women's Series? Have you got any other events that take your eye away from the Women's Series as well?
So I'm looking at maybe doing the qualifiers for Lakeside. I think I'm not sure if that's been announced yet, but I'd love to play at Lakeside. The Women's Series is obviously the main objective. I wasn't going to go to Germany, but with my ranking, I think I'm joint 9th in the order of merit now. So I think I'd be silly not to go to Germany. And maybe some ATC events.
Well, it looks like the darts is going to keep you busy again. And lastly, away from the darts, we saw as well you're a big football fan. Portsmouth in particular, not a bad season for them, winning promotion from League One back to the Championship. Are the good times back at Fratton Park?
Oh, I hope so. It's been a long time without them, so yeah, hopefully.
Well, fingers crossed for that. Gemma, great to get you on the show, and it's been great to see you back on the tour this year and picking up some wins, and we wish you all the best for what else is to come in 2024 as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Gemma for joining us, and we'll continue the show with a look back at the Women's Series at the weekend and 2 titles for Bo Greaves. She bounces back to reclaim number 1 spot on the Women's Series and the Women's Series World Match Play Order of Merits. But what were your main takeaways from the weekend in Wigan?
I mean, we have to start with Bo Greaves, as you mentioned, 2 titles, the final in all 4 events. But I think more absurdly was that first event on the Sunday, where in the first match she lost 0 legs. In the second match, she lost 0 legs. And I don't want to bore you by going through every single match because it's going to be the same all across the line. She won the title without dropping a leg. I know that happened once or twice in the news of the world, but that was because those were best of 3 matches. So while that's still impressive to never drop a leg, it happens. These were all best of 7 or best of 9 matches. She had to win, in the end, 31 legs across 7 matches, and she did that without defeat, 31-0. The same score that is, in fact, the largest international football result ever when Australia beat American Samoa about 20 years ago. Well, she did that across 7 matches against some of the best female darts players in the world: Lisa Ashton, Fallon Sherrock, Robin Byrne. So a little bit different and just utterly insane. But I think the more impressive thing is that she was able to do it even though she didn't really play that well in most of the events over the course of the weekend. That title where she won all 31 legs aside, she didn't really improve upon her seasonal performances in winning the title on the second event on Saturday. And she did improve, and she had a great consistency in the first event on the way to the final, but she didn't hit any of her highest heights. She was playing more consistently than all season, but only slightly above her seasonal average in that event. She was still getting results. And for someone who clearly was coming in lacking in confidence after a poor start to the season, not just in the PDC, but also in some of the WDF events, to be able to get to a final when you're not playing at your best, and then to be able to win a title in the next event when you're not playing at your best, I think is really impressive. And now, obviously, her confidence is back, and now she's starting to improve again. But I also, want to mention, Noah Lynn van Leuven winning the first event, and to win that event against Bo Greaves, coming from 4-0 down in the final to win 5-4, that is impressive. And I think that deserves a round of applause, because Bo just needed one of the last 5 legs, and Noah Lynn barely even gave her a look in any of the 5. I also want to talk about Mikuru Suzuki. Even though she won the title, I have a little bit of concern about where her game is right now. Obviously, she has confidence. She won the title, but she's 3.36 points down on where she was last season. Granted, this is only 8 events, is not a full season, but that is a huge regression. And she didn't top 81 in any of her matches all weekend, including on the way to the title. She is nowhere to be seen in relation of performances to Fallon Sherrick or Bo Greaves, or even Noah Lynn van Leuven. She got results. She's winning. She has confidence, but she's not playing at anywhere near the level that we expect from her. And I wonder if that's going to change. And then lastly, Lisa Ashton. She did struggle in the final event, even though she got results. But in the first 3 events, in the beginning of the final event on Sunday, in 17 matches, 12 of them were above her seasonal average. That's something that, I've been focusing on over the last year or two, pointing that out when players are playing above or below their seasonal average. And to do it in 12 out of 17 matches is really significant, because it shows that Lisa Ashton was improving. She did struggle at the end on Sunday, but that's to be expected. Players are going to do worse in the final event of her long weekend. But Lisa Ashton seems to be getting back towards her best. She still has a long way to go, but again, a giant leap in the right direction for the 4-time world champion.
Good picks there. And I'm going to start with someone that you didn't mention, and we've just heard from her on this week's show, Gemma Hayter. And I remember chatting to her briefly back in 2016, just after she made her debut for the England ladies team in the British Internationals, and back then she said it was a bit of a shock to get selected for the team, but during the season, I think it was the halfway point, she realised that she was playing, in her words, the form of her life, and she could make the England team. And I'd argue that form from 8 years ago has been surpassed with what she's produced over the first 2 weekends of the Women's Series this year. And we are recording this before chatting with Gemma, so I'm not sure yet if she took any time away from the game or carried on playing at a local level during those 8 years, but up until this year, her name's not, well, it's a name that I've not come across for a little while, but she's come into the Women's Series this year and already made a statement, 5th on the averages, above some world-class names, including Mikuru Suzuki, who you mentioned there, but not just the averages, it's some of the results as well. And we're talking about last weekend in this question, but I'll just quickly touch on her first weekend where she made a semi-final in the first event, 96, almost 97 average in one of her matches from the last event of the weekend as well. But focusing on the weekend just gone, a semi-final and a quarter-final from the 4 events, and the eye-catching result, it's got to be the 4-2 win against Fallon Sherrick, where she averaged 97, and she almost put out Fallon in the next event as well, missing match starts, but put that disappointment behind her with a run to the semi-finals where she come unstuck against Bo Greaves. But it's easy to say, but she's won £1,600 from those 2 weekends. Had she replicated that form, come back 9 months earlier, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that she couldn't be in a spot for Blackpool right now. But as far as the race is concerned, not being in the field for those first 12 events during that qualification period, she's only just started playing on the Women's Series this year, but you'd probably say it's come a little bit too late, this comeback, as far as the match play this year. But if she carries on the way she's going, then I think we've got to say that the 2025 match play race, that's already gotten more interesting, and there's another contender in there. But just finally a word on some of the title winners from the weekend, and Beau Greaves very nearly completing that clean sweep. 2 runners up, 2 titles in there. That first final, 4-0 up on Noah Lynn van Leuven, who came back with those 5 straight legs. And in the decider, Beau, she had no answer. 14 darter on throw for Noah Lynn, her second title of the year, and looking well set now to get back to the world match play. What a response, though, from Beau Greaves to win the next 2 events, and that second event that you mentioned, a perfect 31 legs played, 31 legs won. I've had similar records in events. It's usually the other way around where I've lost every leg. So incredible stuff. And she did look to be on for the hat-trick. She made the final of that last event and then produced, I think it was probably her second lowest average of the weekend, but at the wrong time. 75 average, and Makuru, who averaged 74 herself, as you pointed out there, when we get towards the end of these weekends, the 4th events, it can be difficult for players to keep that form going. But we saw at the end, both players weren't near their best at all, and Makuru punishing her opponent's mistakes. And she was a little bit fortunate at times, but she made the most of it. And all these events, they are worth exactly the same amount of prize money. So to get that extra £1,000 on her rankings, it is still early days. But when you're looking at that race for Ali Pali, the top 2 getting in, that extra £1,000 is kept her firmly in that race after 2 weekends, and not playing at the best, but she's able to get a title. So she can take something from that when we resume the Women's Series in a few months' time.
Anything else for this week? I kid. I don't want to talk about the Premier League, but we kind of have to.
Contractually obliged, I think, is the correct phrase.
Yeah. And don't worry. Once we finish talking about the Premier League, we have a great interview coming up and some really good listener questions. So we'll get through our contractual obligations. 4 nights of the regular season left to go. Is it now a 5-player race for the 4 playoff spots? And who do you think will be the 4 players lining up at the O2?
Well, I'll just run through the table as things stand, if you're like us and you've not really been following it that closely this year. But Luke Humphries and Luke Littler both on 26 points at the top of the table. Nathan Aspinall on 23, Michael Van Goen on 22. They are the current top 4. Then just below them 4, you've got Michael Smith on 20, and then the 3 outsiders, you'd say, going into these last 4 weeks, Goen Price on 12, Rob Cross on 11, and Peter Wright on 4. And yeah, only 4 weeks to go. We know the fixtures for the next 3 weeks, and it's an awfully tough run-in for Goen Price the next 3 weeks. He's currently in 6th place, but he's got Luke Littler this week, who's 2nd, then Humphries, who's top, then MVG, who's 4th, and were he to stay in that 6th spot, then it would be 3rd place in that last week, which is Nathan Aspinall at the moment. So potentially he could have to play all of the top 4 in his first round game of the Premier League for these next 4 weeks. So on one hand, it's an opportunity to make up points on all 4 of those players, and if you can get to 5th spot before that last week, the way the fixtures work, it would be 5th against 4th. So if he could get to 5th and the gap is 5 points or less, then and he goes all the way and wins that final night, it's a real chance to sneak in. But the problem for Goen Price has been picking up points regularly. Luke Littler, he's been the master of it this year. Only 3 of the 12 nights he's lost his first game. He's left these big arenas without adding 2 points to his tally at minimum. Last year, Goen Price, he only lost his first game 5 times across the whole season, and there was that run from night 7 to 13, a 7-week stretch where he picked up points every week, and he went from 4th to 1st in the table, and it helped winning 3 of the nights during that run and making 2 more finals, of course. But it's that sort of run that Goen Price is going to need now. Same for Rob Cross. He's a point further back. He's on quite a losing streak now, 6 defeats in a row. That's taken him from 4th to 7th. For both of them, I think it's got to be a final minimum this week in Liverpool, or they're going to be out of the running. Realistically, though, I think it's got to be a title this week, and the full 5 points, then you can really start to get something going. As for who makes the top 4, it's pretty tight right now, but I think the 2 Lukes are there. Then it's 2 from the next 3 of Aspinall, Van Goen and Smith. Nathan Aspinall, he won last week in Rotterdam. But I've got a sneaky feeling, just looking at the fixtures, that Nathan Aspinall, Michael Smith game, week 15, the penultimate league night, could have a big say on who gets into the playoffs. I think looking at the fixtures, Aspinall, he's got Humphries and Littler first game the next 2 weeks. Smith and Van Goen, they've got Wright and Cross between them over the next 2 weeks, a more favourable draw at the moment. So, yeah, I've got a feeling that Michael Smith is going to get in. He's the player currently 5th, but I think he is going to get in that top 4, and it might just come down to a 4th v 5th decider in that final week between MVG and Aspinall, and I'll make my prediction nearer the time for that one.
Yeah, I don't want to say quite yet that it's a 5-way race for 4 spots, as you mentioned, Gerwyn Price. I don't want to write him off yet because of how well he's playing. We talked about it last week, and he's still second in the Premier League in averages. He's really playing at a very high level and just not getting the results. And at some point, those results will come in, and it would just take him winning a couple nights, potentially, to maybe not move into the top 4, but to move right there within a match or two. And if you get into 5th place, as you mentioned, on the final night, you go against the person in 4th, and therefore you might not necessarily control your destiny, because you might, well, you probably do control your destiny, I should say, unless you're too far back to get there. But you might just have a 1-match shootout, and potentially that be enough, or need to just win 1 match on top of that. And if Gerwyn Price can get himself in that position with how well he's playing, and certainly then would come in with more confidence, having just won a couple nights to get him in that position, I think you cannot write him off. But it is currently a huge gap between him and even 5th place Michael Smith. 8 points. That's not quite 2 titles, but it is a semifinal and a title. A runner-up and a title between the two. And that is a lot to make up, because Michael Smith just winning 1 match on any of the other nights would force Gerwyn Price to need 2 titles. And that's, again, just to get to 5th. Who will make it? I mean, it's amazing that no one's clinched yet, even not mathematically, obviously, but even like in practice, because over the last couple of years, someone would have been 9-10 points ahead. And while that, again, is not mathematically clinched, because everyone's going to be taking points off of one another, it's in practice. Right now, everyone's averaging, well, the people at the top are averaging just a bit over 2 points per night. That means if you keep up that pace, then it would be about 30, 31 points needed. Nobody's there yet. Luke Humphries, Luke Littler, they're a title away from it. And the way they're currently playing, there's a very good chance they'll get that title. But they're not there yet. And one of them could lose in the quarterfinals each of the next few nights and suddenly find themselves down in 5th place. So it's tough to say who it's going to be. But overall, they are the 2 best players in the world right now, and they are the 2 best players in the Premier League right now, even though there is a slight gap of 0.02 points between Littler and Price in terms of averages, where Littler's down to 3rd. In essence, that's the same thing. So I think Humphries and Littler would get in, and then it just becomes 2 of, I'll say 4 other players, because I think Gerwyn Price isn't out of it yet, but he has a lot of work to do. And I'm going to go Michael van Gerwen and Michael Smith. I think it'll be the Lukes 1 and 2 in either order, the Michaels 3 and 4 in either order. And the question is, will we have a Luke Derby, a Michael Derby, or potentially neither for the title?
We're going to have to hang tight to find out. Let's bring in our final guest on this week's show. Before we get to the mailbag, here's our chat with one of the debutants on the European Tour this weekend. He is one of the new tour card holders for 2024. Here's our chat with Dom Taylor. I'm pleased to say we're joined by one of the debutants on the European Tour this weekend, Dom Taylor. Thanks for the time again, Dom. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Doing well, thank you. And we're talking just a few days before you make your Euro Tour debut out in Austria. When we're talking, the draw isn't out yet, but it's been a few weeks since you won through those qualifiers. So how much are you looking forward to getting up on that stage on Friday?
I cannot wait just to even build the experience of being main stage in front of hundreds, possibly thousands of people, with the main cameras fully focused just on me. I'm absolutely buzzing for it.
Well, we'll come back to the Euro Tour a bit later on, but lots to catch up on with you since we last had you on the show way back in August of 2021. You just made 4 finals in a row on the Development Tour. At that point, were you thinking, I've got a real shot of winning a tour card here?
I felt confident. Obviously, at that stage, I had only been on the circuit, I think maybe 18 months. So there was still a lot of work in progress to do. But I knew I had it in me to be able to succeed in doing what I've been dreaming of doing. And now I'm living that dream.
Yeah, here you are. And
in the end you finished up just short on the Order of Merit, a quarter-final in the last event, despite that 97 average against Bradley Brooks. How tough was it to get over that disappointment? Or, as you just said there, you were still relatively new to the tour. Were you able to move on from it?
Yeah, I just learned to build on from what I wasn't able to succeed on doing and just keep fully focused at my game and work hard and produce what I knew I could produce to get where I needed to be.
And since then, we've seen you be a regular on the development tour, the challenge tour, Q School as well, and fast forward to the start of 2023, you go very close again to joining the tour full time, this time at Q School, a run to the final on one day, but you end up 1 point short in the end. How did you reflect on that week at Q School last year?
It hurt massively, obviously, especially losing in the final on the first day and then knowing that I only really needed another point in the following 3 days and just couldn't get over that line. But looking back at it now, I would probably say that it might have been a little bit too early, whereas I managed to get 8 appearances on the Pro Tour last year without having my card, which then gave me the experience to look at what I knew I had to prepare for, and obviously I managed to make a semi-final in one of those appearances as well. So I showed that I knew I could do it, and I showed everyone else that I could do it. And watch out for the name because he's coming.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to come on to that semi-final that you just touched on there. You made your mark on the Pro Tour towards the end of last year, getting to the semis in one of those Players' Championships. What are your memories of that day?
Absolutely incredible scenes. Just played absolutely phenomenal all day, ground out what I needed to grind out. I was unlucky against Ross Smith, but he had that little bit of extra experience and being in the game as long as he has and at the level he has, and I just wasn't able to get over that final touch.
You took plenty of scalps that day, beating major winners like Simon Whitlock, Darryl Gurney, Andrew Gilding, a 5-time world champion in Raymond van Barneveld to make that Final Four. Are you starting to really believe then that a title could be on when you make the semis?
100%. I mean, like I said, I was falling short. I mean, I think I missed double 8 for the 136 to win the match, maybe, against Ross Smith. And I think at that point I was just thinking, wow, I've come that close, literally margins away from being into a maiden Pro Tour final without even having a tour card. I think I would have possibly been the 6th person, if that, to make a final without a card.
Yeah, it's a great achievement, even still getting to the semi-finals, just losing out, as you said there, to Ross Smith in a deciding leg. But looking back, how much confidence did that run in particular give you going into Q School this year, that if you did get that tour card, you would belong with the rest of the pros on the tour?
Immense amounts of confidence. I mean, I knew I had the ability to be able to do it, but then, as I said previously, it just showed that I've got that ability, and it made me believe even more that when I do get that card, I know I'm going to be able to make that spot because I've done it before.
Definitely. Well, before we get on to this year in Q School, I've got to mention the infamous joint gun celebration with Tommy Morris on the Modus Super Series. Whose idea was that?
So we kind of got... that was one of the first times I really met Tommy, and we were just chatting. We bonded really well. And we both knew that we were through to the Saturday night and didn't really have much to play for. And we said before the game that no matter what happens, we'll do it, because I love that celebration. And so we said, yeah, no matter what the result, we'll do it. And there was I had so many questions. Oh, did you choreograph it? Did you practice it? It just timed perfectly that we both looked at the camera and done the gun at the same time.
Good times. Right, well, let's get on to Q School this year then, and a week that I'm sure is going to live long in the memory for you. A 94 average in that second stage, the second highest of the week, and it was, I guess, a case of all or nothing in those 4 days. You either made the final or lost in the first round. So talk us through the emotions you went through on your way to winning your card this year.
The first day wasn't so great, and then on the second day, lost in the final to a very good friend in Rob Grundy. He played absolutely superb. And I was just thinking then after that, another final lost at Q School, cannot do that again. And then went into the third day, obviously full of confidence, knowing that I just lost in the final, knowing I needed a couple of points. Fell short again. And then the final day, I was just saying, keep your head down, just go for it, do what you got to do. Managed to build enough points after winning my last 16 game, I think it was, to secure my card. And then it was just a case of just relaxing, throwing, and ended up going on playing some great stuff and winning the day outright. Proved that I didn't need to do it on points, I could do it outright.
Yeah, I was going to say, on that final day, you obviously wrap it up in style, the tour card, winning the day outright, but you were saying there you could kind of relax once you knew you were done. I know a lot of the players, they like to follow the darts ranking site when their name turns dark green. Were you one of those players that was keeping an eye on that as the day was going on?
I was a little bit, but I also had my father-in-law with me that he's absolutely stats mad and follows everything. I mean, when we're at the Pro Tour, he's got his laptop up, his iPad up with 5 different games open, following each person in the management group, and so I kind of didn't really need to keep an eye on it because he kept giving me the little tap on the arm, 2 more games, 1 more game. So I was just a bit fully focused on winning game by game, really.
Happy days. Well, we mentioned a couple of times how you've come close before to getting that tour card, and I know you've said you felt like you always had it in you to get that tour card, but was there a time when you thought it might never happen, or did you always keep that belief?
No, I always had the belief. I mean, people said to me, what's your aim? What do you want? It was like when Dan Dawson interviewed me and Josh Richardson afterwards on the final day. He said, what's your target at the end of the 2 years? Straight down the line, still have my card.
Yeah, it's a good target to have. And well, let's look at life on the tour so far for you, because you've picked up a few big wins already this season. Stephen Bunting, Dimitri van der Berg, shortly after they both won their major titles. How do you reflect on these first few months?
Feel great. There's still plenty more to come, of course, but it's going in the right direction. So I'm glad to, as we said, finally have my first maiden Euro Tour appearance. It's just building blocks and just taking this year as finding the feet and getting into it, and then next year is the fact of pushing and defending everything that I have to keep my card.
And I remember the last time that we spoke with you, you mentioned you were a full-time chef, often doing 13-hour shifts and then 1 or 2 hours of darts after work. Are you still juggling the two? And if so, how do you make them two work hand in hand?
No, so I ended up packing in chefing, going back almost 3 years ago now. No, probably 2 years, to be honest, because I just couldn't do the hours, and with having my little girl as well, it was just getting too much with what I wanted to achieve in darts. So I then went to a Monday to Friday, 8 till 4:45. So I had that time in the evenings for family time and to practice. And now I am fully living my dream and doing darts full time.
Well, glad you've gone full time with the darts. We were going to ask you what your favourite dish was as a chef, where you like to eat. You can still answer them if you want, but obviously you're out eating nowadays. You ain't got to cook the meals yourself as a chef.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love the cooking at home, and I do a couple of shifts here and there for one of my sponsors that runs a sports bar down Supreme Sports Lounge in Bristol. So I do a couple of shifts for him, and I was saying to him the other day how I don't really miss the kitchen much, but I just miss the vibes that I used to have in there, and just the jam and the laughs.
Fair enough. Well, I'm sure you're getting plenty of laughs with your stable mates. You obviously signed up with Mac Elkin's team at the Sportsman Management Company this year. Before that, you were with Will Adamson. The two work closely together. So what's it been like in Mac's team so far?
Oh, it's been brilliant. They're all a great bunch of lads. We go out for meals together, sit on the tables together. It's just it's a nice mixture of nationalities as well, to be able to pick up new things and learn languages and just talk in general about it. Obviously, being with Dimmy as well, I've built a close relationship with Dimmy, and with the level he's playing at now, it's nice to be able to go back and speak to someone, and Jose himself as well, to go back and speak to someone that's been at the top as such and able to get their opinions on how I'm doing and playing and their advice, etc.
Just a few more before we let you go. We'll finish up with a look ahead, and obviously a big decision for any dart player when they get on the stage is choosing a walk-on song. So what can we expect to hear you walk out to on Friday?
So Friday is, I'm a big drum and bass fanatic, so it's probably going to be Badder Down by Chasing Status. But that's only because I know the Euro tours, all the Germans, the Austrians like the high tempo music. But if it's in England, then being from Bristol, it's got to be Combine Harvester.
Oh, hopefully we'll hear that one soon as well. And for some darts fans, Friday, it will be one of the first times they've seen you play, particularly on a stage. But looking at how you won through those qualifiers, 95, 98, 99 averages just a few weeks ago, where do you feel your game is at going into this weekend?
Very good. Practice is going well. Game time's going good. So just like to keep my head down and go in and just hopefully play like I know I can, and not let any nerves or pressure get on top of me, and just play the board, not think about the crowd, the opponent or anything like that. Just do what I got to do.
And lastly, we know it's much harder these days for new tour card holders to get into the Euro Tour events, but is there anyone that you fancy playing on Friday for your debut, or are you happy to take on whoever you get pulled out with in the draw?
Anyone, mate, to be honest. They've got to play me, I'm not playing them.
Well, Dom, always a pleasure to get you on the show. Thanks again for taking the time, and wish you all the best with not just the Euro Tour debut this weekend, but what else is to come in 2024 as well.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Dom for joining us, and we'll finish up the show with the mailbag. We've got a good mix of questions this week. We were talking about it off air. The first one comes from Darts Singer, who says, Ross Smith got close, but who is the next player you could see getting over the line and picking up a first Euro Tour title?
Unfortunately, they did away with the Challenge Tour qualifiers, and Mark Walsh didn't go to Q School anyway, so can't play the Challenge Tour. So I can't say who I think would obviously dominate the Euro Tour if he were playing on it. So I'll have to go with people who are currently on tour. But there's quite a few who are playing at that level right now that you could see happening. And one of those is Ross Smith. He's still in that conversation. This was not a fluke. This was not anything out of the ordinary. He might not have been the name you would have said at the beginning of the week, but you weren't going to be like, Ross Smith made the final? No, because he's playing at that level. But so is Stephen Bunting. So is Danny Noppert. So is Chris Dobie, Nathan Aspinall. And then you also have players like Dimitri Vandenberg, Dirk van Dijvenbode, Josh Rock, who are all in that conversation, but they're not quite there. Even some players who are moving in the right direction. Even Gabriel Clemens having a great couple of matches to get himself back in that conversation. There's a lot of people, but I think of those, the two that are playing the most consistently brilliant right now are Chris Dobie and Stephen Bunting. Therefore, they're going to put themselves in that position the most often, and I think one of them will do it. I'll go Stephen Bunting. He won the major earlier this year, and I just think he's playing like a different player, and he's still getting better. So I'll go Bunting as the next first-time European Tour winner.
Well, we can look forward to everyone going Bunting mental on the Euro Tour very soon. Well, we've just been chatting about the Premier League, and this time of year when the Premier League is going on, it's kind of swaying my answer on this one, because I want to say Nathan Aspinall, he's on that list of major winners that you mentioned there, that you think, how have they not got their hands on a Euro Tour title yet? The same with Dimitri Vandenberg, Chris Dobie, Stephen Bunting as well. So because we're being asked who's going to be the next one, we've still got a few more Euro Tours whilst the Premier League is going on, and I think it is a tough ask to go from that Premier League on a Thursday night to then playing on the Friday. Nathan Aspinall being outside that Pro Tour top 16 to be a seeded player through to the Saturdays, that's a big ask for me. So Danny Noppert, I'm going to throw his name into that as well. He's made a couple of finals before, but I'm going to go slightly left field on this. I'm not going to go for a former major winner. I think, like with Martin Schindler, the next first time Euro Tour winner is going to be someone who hasn't won a major before. They're going to have won a title on the floor before, so it's not going to be a first PDC title of any kind, but I think it would represent another breakthrough in their career. So I'm going to go with a player that you mentioned actually there, Josh Rock. I think he's had, looking at his run this year, 2 6-5 defeats in quarterfinals in the 4 events so far on the Euro Tour, a 99 average against Gerwyn Price, and he had those match starts in the other decider against Gary Anderson at the weekend. So I think if he can just put that final piece of the jigsaw together, we know the standard he can produce. He can make that next step. So you've gone with Stephen Bunting. I'm going to go with Josh Rock to be that next first-time Euro Tour title winner.
I realized I forgot to mention Ryan Searle as well. Big G180 asked, how good actually is, maybe I'm just going to mispronounce this name, correct me if I got it wrong, Gary Anderson? And if not for Taylor, would he have been the GOAT?
Yeah, we spoke about it earlier with Gary Anderson. I mentioned a lot of the major final defeats that have been to either Phil Taylor or Michael van Gerwen, 8 of the 13 runner-ups, I think it was, in the PDC. So it could have been a lot more silverware for Gary Anderson, but it's still a very good CV that he's got. And for me, it's enough to be in my top 5 all-time list. I've actually got him at number 4, just ahead of Raymond van Barneveld, which shows how highly I rate him and what he's done in the PDC compared to someone that's won 5 world titles across the 2 codes. But if you've listened to any Gary Anderson interview over the last few years, you know that darts right now, it's not the be all and end all for him. Yes, he still wants to compete. He still enjoys the game, playing on the tour. But for him, he has got other interests outside of the game. He's fishing lakes. He wants to spend time with his family, and you can't begrudge him that. And as he said before, he's been living out of a suitcase for a lot of years. So he's winding down his career, although we are seeing him a lot more these days on the Euro Tour. But I think had Phil Taylor not been there, would he have been the GOAT? I'm not so sure. I think Michael van Gerwen would still be ahead of him. And we saw probably like the early years of this podcast, actually, the rivalry between Michael van Gerwen and Gary Anderson. It was such a good rivalry to follow those two going at each other most weeks. So I'd still put MVG ahead of him, but I want to say it was that lure of playing Phil Taylor. That was one of the reasons for Gary Anderson making that switch from the BDO to the PDC. And maybe if he'd have moved over sooner, okay, he's been in the PDC for 15 years now. It's a big portion of his playing career, but he's had a lot of success. He is in that twilight of his career now, but as we saw at the weekend, when he's on, there's few players more enjoyable to watch. And even now, when he's not at his best, he can find a way to win and lift these titles. And who knows, as we talked about earlier on in the show, we may yet see him lift more silverware before he does put his darts in the case for the last time.
Agree. And I think one thing to remember is that Gary Anderson, I don't think has ever been the best player in the world at any given time. He was the world champion, and he was the double back-to-back world champion, and deservedly so. He destroyed Michael van Gerwen in the semifinals one of those years. He beat Phil Taylor in the final as well. And he beat Adrian Lewis, a 2-time world champion, in the other final. So he was a very deserving world champion back-to-back. But he was always, at best, the second best player in the world, and often even lower. You know, you look prior to 2014, 2015, he did, you know, he won a Premier League, he won other events, he won a couple of the cross-code events before switching over. But was he, I mean, Phil Taylor was clearly the best in the world, but was he the second best then? I don't think so. You know, Raymond van Barneveld, James Wade, Simon Whitlock, they were all there in that conversation, Adrian Lewis as well. And Gary Anderson wasn't consistent enough, particularly on the finishing back then, to be the clear-cut number 2, if he even was the number 2. He was probably 3rd or 4th. On his day, he might have been the best, but he wasn't the best. And he wasn't, clearly not clear-cut second best. Then, eventually, as he got to be the double world champion, his finishing became phenomenal, and he clearly was the second best player in the world. Michael van Gerwen was a cut above everyone else, but Gary Anderson was a cut above whoever was number 3. You know, you could throw out a bunch of names. James Wade still there, Adrian Lewis still there. Mensur Suljovic, I think, was in that conversation as well at that time, and you know, a few other players were. But Gary Anderson was the clear cut. Obviously, Phil Taylor. Need I forget him? But Gary Anderson was the clear cut second best, but it wasn't behind the GOAT. Phil Taylor at that point. It was behind Michael van Gerwen. And Gary Anderson then regressed in 2018, 2019, obviously won a major, but he was still in that conversation for number 2. But he was certainly more like the number 3 or 4 by that point, with Peter Wright having come up. Gerwin Price was on the rise. And I think that really sums it up. Gary Anderson, at best, has never been the best player in the world, even when Phil Taylor wasn't there. And it was only for a short time when he was the clear-cut second best in the world. So I can't say that if it weren't for Phil Taylor, he'd be the GOAT. He's one of the greatest players of all time. And the only people who have ever been clearly better than him until the last few years have been people in that GOAT conversation. But he wouldn't have been the GOAT if not for Phil Taylor. As you said, you have him 4th. I think that's a fair place. Maybe 5th or 6th is where I'd have him. He's up there. But there's a gap between him and the top 3 at the very least.
And our last listener question for this week comes from Russ Barber, who says, with the Luke Littler effect and stories of 10-year-olds getting 104 averages, do you think in 10 to 15 years the majority of tour card holders will be 16 to 35? And would that take something special from darts where you can compete into your 50s?
I don't think that you're going to see a complete disappearance of players in their 50s, but it's going to get harder because the number of really good young players keeps increasing, and the standard that you have to play at keeps increasing. But those players who are currently 16 and 17 will eventually be 26 and 27, and then they'll be 36 and 37. And if they keep improving as well, that's going to force everyone else who's coming up to get even higher to break onto the tour at the beginning. And you're not seeing the players who emerged a decade ago all fall away. Some have, but some have reinvented themselves and become even better. Joe Cullen is a better player than he was 5 years ago, which was a better player than he was 5 years before that. Same for Chris Dobie, same for Dimitri Vandenberg. The list goes on and on. Even players who weren't in that top tier of that generation have improved over time. Luke Woodhouse is a great example of that, and we don't know where their max is. I think you're always going to see players who peak a little bit later or are able to maintain their high level for a long period of time, but I think the overall average age is going to continue to decrease, and the number of players who continue to compete into their 50s will decrease. And I'll add one more thing. Another thing to remember is that the money is increasing, and players who might break through now in their early 20s might just not feel the need to keep playing when they start hitting their 40s, and things become just a little bit more of an effort, and especially not once they hit their 50s. If they're financially set and they're not enjoying it anymore, you might see players retire younger because they've made such a killing over the previous 15, 20 years. It won't be all of them. Some players are going to stay hungry forever. But I think that will happen as well. But overall, I think there will still be players competing well into their 40s and 50s for some time.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And this question from Russ, we should mention this was a story that did the rounds a few weeks ago. So shout out to Owen Bryceland, 10-year-old boy from Cumbernauld in Scotland on the JDC Foundation Tour, winning back-to-back titles. And the Foundation Tour, it's the tour that sits just below the Advanced Tour in the JDC system, but he had 104 average in one of his games, which is the highest ever average recorded on the Foundation Tour. And I'm hearing more and more stories about young players coming through all the time now, and new darts academies starting up, all young boys and girls signing up to play the game, learn how to play the game. And some of these academies, they're full up. You actually can't sign on. You've got to sign on to a waiting list to get in some of them. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how that average age of the tour card holders changes over the years. I mean, tour cards are still relatively new, aren't they? When we think about the PDC, they've been going since 2011, so what's that, 13, 14 years now? It's still quite a short period, but I think Russ, he does raise an interesting subject on what that age pool is going to look like at the top end in, say, 10 or 15 years' time. I think, yeah, you are going to see that trend of that the age group get lower, but I'm not going to say it's going to quickly change where it will be mainly 16 to 35 year olds. Not for a while yet. I think darts is a game where age is still just a number, and I think we are still going to see players in their 40s and 50s win tour cards, play on the tour, and players that start off, younger in their 30s and 40s, carry on and keep their cards for a long time. But I think what we are seeing with the youth systems in place now through the development tour in the PDC, through the JDC and other systems, there's never been a better time for youngsters to hone their craft, and that natural ladder to climb from youth to pro, that pathway is there now. And I do think we are going to see more and more youngsters make that move. So yeah, I think the balance is shifting, not at a drastic rate for me. And like Russ finishes his question with there, that especially in darts that we've got those stories of players in their latter years, in their 50s, coming through the ranks and achieving things. And yeah, I'm with him. Hopefully that is still going to be a thing in 10 or 15 years' time.
All right, I said it once earlier, but I'll say it again for real now. Anything else for this week?
Yeah, we're just going to go through our picks for the Premier. No, I'm joking. I just want to say thank you to our guests this week, to Gemma and Dom for their time. Big thank you as well to our sponsors, to Darts Corner and Condor Darts. Links in the description. Do go and check them out. Thank you to everyone for listening. We appreciate the support. And yeah, that's everything for me. So all I've got to say is until next week, enjoy the darts.
I almost hung up at that joke. We'll be back next week, recap another Euro Tour weekend, and hopefully not have to talk about the Premier League for a couple of weeks. I mean, it is now getting to the point that even I will tune in, especially if it stays a tight race for the final spot, because the quality of darts is fantastic. But you know what else was fantastic? The quality of darts this past weekend on the Euro Tour, with some insane averages, and Damon Hatta being one dart away from the highest average ever. I'd rather watch that. I know most of our listeners would rather watch that. We'll be back next week to talk about that, and maybe if something absurd happens, the Premier League as well. Hang tight to find out.